This conference will now be recorded.
Well, so I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who's logging on GoToMeeting. This meeting is being recorded, and we're happy to have everyone here in person. And we're also happy to have folks from the Montechusett region, our planners and conservation professionals, joining us remotely on GoToMeeting. So with that, I'll introduce and leave it to Sarah and Alec from Mass Wildlife. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it. Thank you all for joining us today and for having us. Quick confirmation online. Can you all hear us and everything, see everything here all right? Hopefully. Okay, great. There's some in the back. All right. Well, feel free to jump in as we're going online or in person. So yeah, just a quick recap. I'm Alec and this is Sarah, both from Mass Fish and Wildlife or Mass Wildlife. And we are both BioMap outreach specialists with Mass Wildlife. Our job is really to spread awareness about the updated version and provide technical assistance and all types of users. And yeah, also do presentations like this and meetings to help discuss, really be used for conservation actions across different scales. And we're just really excited to have great representation from the region and hopefully a great discussion on how this can help with your day-to-day or long-term planning. So as I said, feel free, we're going to go through a quick slides, presentations. If you've seen presentation before, might be a bit of repeat from that, but then we'll pause for some questions, and also feel free to jump in if you have questions as we're going through it. Then we'll take a look at the website and the interactive mapper, and we can kind of talk more specifics about areas you might have questions or specific data questions you might have. We can open up for more discussion and things like that. So with that, we'll get started. So, certainly don't have to tell you all, but, in Massachusetts, we really have quite a lot of life and natural landscapes, 3 million acres of forest, 1,500 miles of coastline, and a vast network of rivers and critical wetlands. These are really supporting these diverse natural ecosystems that provide habitat for a wide variety of plants and animals. And these natural systems really offer vital benefits. They filter our air, they clean our water, they provide food and economic opportunities and recreation opportunities, while also, helping mitigate the effects of climate change. This is really enriching the quality of our lives as well. But and the people really of the Commonwealth have spent decades protecting and thank you, protecting the beautiful natural landscapes. But we've seen, however, despite the significant progress, we really are seeing a crisis in our biodiversity at a global, national, and state scale. In Massachusetts, we currently have 432 species on our endangered species list, and threats to our biodiversity include such things as habitat loss and fragmentation, invasive species, and emerging diseases, and all of which is really being compounded by climate change. And so, we really want to emphasize that, wanting to reverse these trends, urgent action is really needed, and that's where we come in with BioMap and a lot of these conversations. And so, we're really excited in introducing the updated BioMap. And just to get ahead of it, as some of you might not have noticed, we're calling it BioMap rather than BioMap 3, if you're familiar with the previous version. This is meant to reflect that this is going to be much more of a living product online, using those interactive mappers and hopefully updating more frequently in that way. So moving forward, calling it BioMap from now on, and just the version that's going to be up there is then we know is the most updated version, and not getting away from that numbering as we kind of continue forward. But a quick, whether online or in person, thumbs up or hands, who has used previous versions of BioMap before? Okay, great. Who's checked out the new version yet? Great. So that's we're excited. So as you said, might be a little bit repeat for you in some of the information, but that's great to hear, and we'll go through all the information just so we're all on the same page. So for those that aren't familiar with previous versions, Massachusetts really has a long history of being a leader with development of these groundbreaking conservation tools. I began with BioMap in 2001, then Living Waters in 2003, and then BioMap 2, combined those two together into one product in 2010. and then now the latest version in 2022. So over the years, these products have really provided a great framework for protection and stewardship of lands and waters that are really critical for biodiversity conservation. It's been heavily utilized by land trusts, state agencies, municipalities, and all in between. It's really considered a trusted source and credible information. And this, although we're with Mass Wildlife, you can see this is also a collaboration effort between Mass Wildlife and the Nature Conservancy, the Massachusetts chapter of Nature Conservancy. Really with our similar missions and goals and science-based approaches, we're really great partners to maintain and produce it moving forward. So although we're just with Mass Wildlife, we want to mention our great partnership and the larger BioMap team as well. Just gonna shift. So with BioMap, we really see it as more than a map. We see it as a map, a tool, as well as a vision for the people of the Commonwealth to really come together and strategically protect, manage, and restore lands and waters that are really important for conserving that biodiversity in Massachusetts, really now and into the future. And as we said, if you're familiar with the previous versions, the conservation targets are grouped into these two main elements that you see here: a core habitat and critical natural landscapes. So core habitat is going to be in that darker green, identifying those areas of critical for long-term persistence of the rare species and a wide diversity of resilient ecosystems. And that critical natural landscape identifies those large landscapes and habitat buffers to enhance the resiliency and maintain connectivity, as well as supporting those ecological processes. So you can see represented across the state there. Together, they make up about 2.4 million acres in the state, and about 44% of which is currently permanently protected in that open space. We can talk more about that as well. And so if you are familiar with the previous versions, about 90% of BioMap 2 is in the current version. There is a bit of change and shift in core and CNL, removal from things like new developments or additions to the new methodologies or new data. And we'll talk about some of that in just a bit. So about 90% carryover from the previous version. And again, so those are the two elements of BioMap, the main elements. But if we break them down into their components for each, you can then see what makes up each of those elements. So in that core habitat, again, those habitats for rare species and forest core, aquatic, wetland, as well as priority natural communities. And then those critical natural landscape, things like landscape blocks and coastal adaptation areas and aquatic and wetland core buffer areas. And to look at it on a map version, we can see that element view in that darker and lighter green. But if we want to peel back and take a look at the different components, we can switch the layers, and we'll demonstrate this in a little bit. You can take a look at those individual components and really look into more of that habitat and what's going on in that area. So, and we'll talk about how you can utilize these different layers for your own planning and use. All this, we're looking at our interactive mapper, and we'll show that later. This has been updated with the data has been updated with that latest information on species and habitats, enhance some of the components such as aquatic core, which we'll talk about with some new methodologies, and also including new local and regional components, which we're really excited to introduce and talk about. And I'll turn it over to Sarah to talk more about that.
Make sure I do this right. All right. So this is one of the key innovations that's new this time around with BioMap, and we're very excited about it, the addition of local components or local habitats. And these are locally important habitats that are relevant on a municipal scale for planning and action. And the idea behind this is that, almost every town in the state has some amount of that statewide core habitat or critical natural landscape, but we have a lot of variety over the state in terms of levels of development or types of habitat, et cetera. So those patterns, really vary. And the amount of statewide habitat also varies significantly. So now we've added in these local components which add to each town's understanding of their own natural resources. And we have an example here that illustrates that. And luckily we're right in your region here. This map is showing the landscape blocks, which is one of those components of critical natural landscape. And they use ecological integrity data to identify large intact mosaics of forest and wetland, freshwater habitat, and they support wide-ranging species like moose or black bear, and resilience and abundance of many wildlife and plant species. And so as we're looking at them here, these are defined from the statewide perspective. So this is that statewide data, the largest blocks in each region of the state being selected. But as we can see, this pattern is, some towns don't have any, some towns have a lot, and that abundance really varies. But when we add in the new local component, in this version it's called local landscapes, the local version of landscape blocks, we're now looking at the most intact natural landscapes in each city and town. So it's the same data that was used to create the statewide landscape blocks, but the analysis was done from the perspective of each town, essentially one at a time. And so now we can see how adding this makes BioMap much more relevant to a lot more communities. And also added to BioMap, in addition to that local data, is the regional side of things. So these are habitats that make a significant contribution to conservation at scales larger than just the border of Massachusetts, because as we know, a lot of these wildlife species don't know New Hampshire from Massachusetts or Connecticut from Massachusetts. So, and one example of this is that a recent study showed that tree populations in the eastern United States are moving north and west in response to climate change, one of them being the tulip tree, which is projected to really shift its range significantly through Massachusetts. So this has been in addition to BioMap this time around, regional connectivity data that identifies places that support these large-scale range shifts of plant and wildlife species. Also part of the regional data is regional rare species, and that's looking at species that are highly vulnerable at regional, national, and even global scale. So we're really opening up, from local, statewide, and now regional. BioMap is a lot more expansive in terms of the scales it includes. And finally, another addition to BioMap this time around was the incorporation of climate resilience data. And this is the Nature Conservancy's climate resilience data, identifying places that will help plants, animals, and people cope with the impacts of climate change. So these data, put in the map. So that's the Nature Conservancy's map of their resilience data. And as it's listed here, this data was included in the wetland core, the forest core, and the landscape blocks. And the idea here is that the darker green areas are identifying ecosystems and landscapes that have diverse topography, habitat connectivity, other factors that allow plants and animals to move to suitable habitat in response to changes in temperature and precipitation. Also on this theme, the fisheries team at Mass Wildlife identified freshwater systems that allow species to persist and thrive in the context of climate change and especially warming temperatures. So cold water, freshwater refugia were also built into BioMap, with the idea being it can be a place for those species to go as temperatures are rising. We can get into an example here looking at the data. So I chose this area. It's kind of an intersection. We have Winchendon, Templeton, Phillipston, Royalston, Gardner kind of there in the corner is where they all meet. And I chose this because I think it's a great example of how the new layers of BioMap can really add to connectivity in the overall picture. So that's kind of a zoom out of where we're looking in your region specifically. So this is a region of the state where we can see there's a good amount of, even from that statewide level alone, you have a good amount of core habitat and critical natural landscape. Just as one example, Winchendon is 14.4% core habitat and 39.5 critical natural landscape as we're seeing there. And then even with the statewide data, you can see there's some connectivity here between Winchendon, Royalston in the west, and then over here kind of where Gardner, and then a little sliver Ashburnham and Winchendon meet over there. But then when we peel the layers back, this is a great feature of our interactive mapper. You can do this and really select whichever components you're interested in or create this image with them all together. So just kind of pointing out a few parts in these brown polygons, you have landscape blocks, aquatic core and aquatic core buffers in that blue and then the light blue on the outside, vernal pool cores in that red shape, and some wetland cores and wetland core buffers as well. And so you have in the core habitats, aquatic and wetland core, and then the critical natural landscape is the part where those buffers come in and, focus on areas that increase that connectivity and resilience. But if we go back to that statewide view and then add in the local data, especially this area here, we can really see how that adds in connectivity between the towns, especially, in this little corner. But I've also created, I switched the order. You can do this on GIS as well as on the interactive mapper. If you put the local components on top, we can see there's a good amount of layering happening. And it's important to mention that the local components are designed to work complementary to the statewide components, not isolated from them. So it's good to just see how they work together. There's some overlap, but there's also places where they add area, such as in this northern area. And that's a great feature to have. And if we kind of take it to the regional side of things, this green crosshatch is that regional connectivity data, and some regional rare species in the darker purple. And the Montechusett region is a critical region for regional connectivity. We don't see all of it in this one example, but just as one statistic, 87.4% of Royalston is covered by regional connectivity data. So, we have these areas of high biodiversity and ecological integrity and supporting these natural communities as they, connect between different towns and the movement of wildlife and plant species. So that's a taste of BioMap. We can definitely explore different areas of interest when we get to our demo. People have other towns or maybe want to zoom out a little more. I'd be happy to explore that. But I'm going to pass it over to Alec to continue our presentation.
So having put all that together and look at an example, how does this work and where does it fall into kind of your work? We want to take a quick moment to just make a difference, or a quick, highlight a difference between BioMap and something you might be familiar with, which is called priority habitat or priority and estimated habitat. And that's through the Natural Heritage Atlas. So priority habitat is codified under the Massachusetts Endangered Species Act as the regulatory screening tool to allow the Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Program to review projects or activities for those impacts to state-listed species. This is separate from BioMap. BioMap is strictly a non-regulatory conservation planning tool. That's because it goes beyond that state-listed aspect and goes beyond those priority habitat, the screening process for that. So although BioMap does not fall into that regulatory process for when you're reviewing things at a town level or regional level, is really helpful in the prioritization and conservation planning. We just want to make that clear. You certainly can view these data together, on like Maps Mapper. You can see where those overlap, and certainly we encourage this to impact the way, or influence the way you're making decisions. But for a regulatory purpose, they are separate. So if you have more questions about that, we're certainly happy to answer and kind of discuss more about the role that it plays in. But just wanted to make that clear before we keep going on a little bit there. So, but in looking at it, this is kind of a view of the homepage of our BioMap website. We'll take a look at it in a bit. We keep teasing about this interactive mapper that we have. And this is it's an ArcGIS Online map. You might be familiar with how it works. And through this, you can really customize that data display, as Sarah said, looking at the different components or selecting those different scales. And we also have built in the assessor parcels and the protected open space layer into this mapper, so you can look at the kind of juxtaposition with those or the overlap with those. It also includes an exciting tool to allow users to draw a specific area of interest and derive that information, summarize the BioMap information for that area, produce a map for you with the legend and all that, and we'll show that just a little bit. As I said, this data is available on Mass Mapper, ArcGIS Online, and you can also download it from MassGIS to use in Arc or Q or whatever you might be using. So quite a lot of ways to use it. We certainly can talk about those differences if you have specific software or analysis questions, but we're going to focus kind of on our map for today and just kind of how that works. And then also on the BioMap Hub site that we have quite a lot of resources that we'll show a little bit, but we can't take all the time to look at it. Certainly encourage you to explore more about it. We have things like story maps, these really interactive web pages that walk you through that information. I'm sure you're familiar. and kind of summarizing what we talked about today, and also how to use the map and some other components, as well as these fact sheets that you see on the right. That's going to go into more details about the methodologies and the conservation strategies for each of these components. So if you want to know, how that rare species core layer was made, a little more information about that, if you're kind of really trying to dive into the data, it'll be really useful for you. We also have a technical report that's coming out soon that will be really in depth on the whole process and all the modeling and everything that went into creating all these different components. But we really hope, this providing all these resources and doing presentations and outreach like this, really increasing that ecological literacy to allow individuals and groups to engage and take action and make informed decisions. And that's just, the hub site is a big part of that. And we'll continue and updating through feedback and as things change, adding more resources and things that can hopefully be helpful for all types of users. So we encourage any type of feedback or things to help us advance all of those things. But we really see the value of BioMap going from understanding all this information to implementation on the ground, and that's why we're excited to speak with all of you today. And really, BioMap is supporting a wide range, variety of conservation strategies, and these habitats occur in a wide variety of settings, and they're going to require different conservation strategies. One of those such strategies that we see a lot is land protection. To stop habitat loss and fragmentation. So of over the 200,000 acres of land protection that took place in Massachusetts between 2009 and 2022, about 62% of which occurred within the bounds of BioMap 2. So just to give you an idea of kind of the progress in our state and how that relates with BioMap. And we really hope that this new iteration will continue to focus conservation funding and efforts on these critically important habitats, and tracking it with that protected open space layer is a good way to see that conservation progress. But we also know that land protection is really essential. It's often not enough. Unfortunately, over about 40% of the rare and declining species in our state do require active management and restoration of their habitats. So therefore, BioMap now includes a habitat restoration resource center. And this is going to help provide recommendations and resources for all types of stewardship actions and really help promote habitat resiliency and restore those ecological processes and prepare these habitats to recover from and adapt to climate change. So if you're new to management and restoration, or if you're longtime practitioner, there's quite a lot of information, fact sheets that go into all the different habitats and all the different management strategies that you might find or might be useful. And we can show some examples of that. But that's in addition to and really hoping to add to that. And you want to jump right to it, here's a short link for that. But we'll also show that it's on the main home site as well.
As with the previous versions of BioMap, our hope is, this new BioMap will continue to support conservation planning, funding, as well as collaboration. The idea being that BioMap provides a high return on investment for conservation dollars. BioMap habitats are designed to stand the test of time, supporting biodiversity and resilience now and long into the future. And we're really excited by the emerging opportunities for cities and towns and regions to take advantage of BioMap for these decisions, especially with the local and regional data being added in there. You have open space and recreation plans, master plans, MVP plans. We singled out Gardner here, their 2023 OSRP. Was looking at it just the other day. It's a really cool hybrid because you have some of the newer BioMap data as well as referencing that BioMap 2. And it's just a great example of, incorporating that data into town planning. So little shout out, but a lot of towns in your region have used it in the past or are continuing to use it, depending on where they are in that cycle with the OSRPs, just as one example. In terms of funding, a lot of entities, including Massachusetts Division of Conservation Services, uses BioMap to guide important grant programs. And as I'm sure you all know, the best conservation projects are collaborations, whether that's between organizations, agencies, communities, or even within communities, different groups. And we see BioMap as being a key tool to bring people together to foster these robust partnerships. There we go. Ultimately, BioMap envisions a future in which the people of the Commonwealth invest and strategic protection and stewardship of lands and waters that are most important for conserving biodiversity. In this future, natural systems to continue to ensure that all Massachusetts residents have access to nature and enjoy the benefits of our rich natural heritage. And with BioMap, we can protect our extraordinary biodiversity and vibrant quality of life now and for future generations. As we wrap up here, it was a huge team effort that went into making BioMap. Would not have been possible without financial support from the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, as well as other numerous donors. And then from this massive paragraph, we can see, the nuts and bolts in developing all of BioMap was a massive effort that we're very grateful for everyone's hard work that went into it. And that brings us to the end of our slides. This is the simple link. This will take you to the main website. And I think we'll pause for a few questions, and then we can look at the website itself and that interactive map.
Great, thank you.
Of course. Kind of like the owl for these questions. Yeah, in the room or on Zoom, I'm sure we can, or GoToMeeting, we can figure it out. That's also, it's okay if you don't have questions right now either. Our emails are on those slides, or we'd be happy to give them out after the meeting. If questions occur to you later, that's what we're here for, so please feel free to reach out.
For the local landscapes layer, how is that data gathered and accepted for use in the map? How would we, as municipal employees or working in these different areas, give that information to you to be incorporated?
Sure. So in terms of adding your kind of local data, your own data into, So looking at those fact sheets will help kind of in the tech doc that goes into more specifics. I'll give you a bridge version real quick, but so those landscape plots really are kind of looking at a modeling of the UMass index of ecological integrity model, and so really high ecological integrity areas, as well as looking at some of those other natural features of forest decor and wetland and aquatic areas. So it is really kind of a modeling effort to identify those large impact areas, and then once it's done, like all these other layers are kind of hand delineated and kind of fixed up by our biologists to kind of identify maybe area of country or something that might have missed in that modeling. In terms of understanding and sharing, updating and sharing that information moving forward. So that being the process, and then also including habitat information, through Heritage Hub or Natural Heritage, that people submit information for natural communities or vernal pools or rich species occurrences built into kind of those. So from a community standpoint, that can be a great way in adding data to not just landscape blocks, but other components of BioMap. In terms of kind of your specific areas as well, the shifts in the updates to BioMap are going to come from when it's a large change to some of those source data, things like if tax updates their modeling, or if the land use layer, which we're expecting to kind of change in the next few years, some of those things are incorporated into the modeling. Once those are shifted, we'll look at updating the entire state layer. But in terms of those, it isn't using specific local data to identify those things. It's kind of looking at the larger picture and modeling and identifying those areas. And same with the local landscapes. It's doing that same process, just at a smaller threshold. So if it was 500 acres minimum for an ecoregion in, Tower Garden, you have that much space, right? So making that threshold a little bit smaller to identify those areas. And again, it's looking at just those top priority areas. So it's not going to look up a really large landscape block that might be in your town, but really looking at that top percentage to kind of identify for prioritization. So that's not quite an answer. I think still, just like with other regulatory purposes, reaching out to us as things are changing in your town is certainly helpful, and it certainly will influence how we're maintaining this moving forward. So we absolutely want communication between all types of users, but yeah, always like collecting local data. If that's something for your town is looking at, that Heritage Hub for submitting some of those natural communities, then things like iNaturalist or other community source data. It's starting to be incorporated into our kind of statewide plan as well. So there's a lot of different ways that the kind of communities can get involved with that. But yeah, just those open communications with towns and how we can, if there's watersheds in your town that aren't being represented by that data, we certainly want to know. And we can, yeah, put that into the larger picture of how it will be updated.
I'll quickly mention, just following that topic, Alec is actually going to be transitioning into the role of GIS manager at Mass Wildlife. So great resource for those technical questions, BioMap, and now soon beyond BioMap. So
Certainly.
yeah, for the natural heritage.
Yes.
Yeah.
Any other questions there?
So I just checked here. We don't have right now anything in the chat log.
Okay.
We haven't seen any questions come in for remote users, but I do have one quick question here that I think would be, general interest to the audience. I love how you mentioned the example of the Gardner Open Space and Recreation Plan, not just because I formerly worked in Gardner and worked on the previous draft of that plan, but because I'm curious about ways that we can incorporate BioMap and even its additional components like the habitat management and different resource tools that were created now to take it to the next step. So I guess specifically, do you guys have any thoughts or ideas based on your examples that you've seen, or just how you envision that this might be used best on how we as planners can incorporate it into specifically plans like our open space and recreation plans, and in particular our master plans, which are the towns, cities and towns, long-term vision planning. So just curious if you can talk a little bit about ways to incorporate those types of plans.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of great examples out there. I was browsing, all the different towns in the region, all of their plans yesterday in advance of this. And pretty much every town used BioMap 2 in I would say, very appropriate way where, it's incorporated into maps, land use maps in that section where you're discussing land use and goals for the town. The great thing, I think, what first went to my mind in terms of the new BioMap and changes with that is just more information. You have that local aspect that you can, get more into the fine details and just have more to discuss in terms of what's there in your town, especially in different regions where there's only a few little pieces of BioMap. Now there can be a lot more to explore there. So that's my first thought. And of course, with the regional as well, just opening those horizons in terms of scale.
I'll give an example.
Sure, please.
In Westminster, when we updated our open space plan, we had your GIS folks put the BioMap information on top of our property map.
Yeah.
So we could get an idea as to who owns the most environmentally sensitive land, and do we know those folks? Are they getting close to the point where they're going to be dishing it off to their neighbors or selling it for development? And we use that to put together a prioritized list of folks who wanted to reach out.
That's a great example. We're in the process of kind of collecting case studies because we get questions frequently about, examples of what other towns have done. So we'd definitely be interested in hearing more about how you have been using it. I can't recall off the top of my head if Wendell is in your purview. No, okay. Just a little bit outside. They incorporated BioMap with the help of, they were with FERCOG into their plans. So I think, keeping an eye out for just those new rounds of OSRPs. I think, we've been doing a lot of outreach, outreach to towns, specifically, getting on the phone and doing presentations for conservation commissions and other groups like open space committees. So hopefully when those new rounds, the 2023, 24, 25 OSRPs come around, and I think with the new data, there's a lot more room for, creativity to look at what's in your town and just increase the depth of the analysis.
We've also seen, bringing into other analyses more advanced, coastal adaptation things like on the Cape and with Bay and how they can, utilize those areas and identify those priority needs or other, Essex County Greenbelt as a prioritization, land prioritization
That's a great
process
one.
that uses BioMap for identifying those. Yeah, or even MVP plans and preparedness and trying to find those areas that are really crucial and towards infrastructure and new development and yeah, really kind of a whole host of ways to do it. And that local aspect as well. You know, how does that come in? We haven't seen, I don't think we've seen a plan yet that shows the local data in a map or includes that local aspect to it, which is a question that certainly we're continuing to find it, how does that play a role into it as well, in terms of the percentages or stuff like that. So there's a lot of opportunities, a lot of great ways to kind of incorporate that in non-regulatory ways.
Yeah. Shutesbury, you mentioned Wendell. Shutesbury is another good example.
Yeah.
Their draft plan right now is coming out. So I'm not positive that it incorporated new BioMap, but it did cover BioMap habitat.
Yeah.
Good job of it. They're great neighboring to Wendell.
Yeah.
And I will also mention, it doesn't just stop at BioMap. Natural Heritage has other data sets as well that, like certified vernal pools we see incorporated and kind of some overlaps with that as well. And priority habitat or some of those other things that you tend to see with it. So yeah, there's a whole kind of combination of things that we see.
I like Steve's example that looking at particular parcels and planning ahead, and that's good for the local level. Probably something we could maybe look into doing here at a regional scale, to do a kind of regional prioritization.
Sure.
To help our communities plan for land grants and other executive orders.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's-
Yeah. With like FERPAC is another example of, they have a regional pollinator plan or town pollinator plans and how that's incorporated, or just regional planning and, yeah, so those different scales and kind of different nuances to it. It's interesting. That was kind of newer pollinator aspect to it, which is interesting to see. So, yeah. But maybe we can, do you want to switch over to a little look at the website? And then feel free to jump in questions or, we can do.
Hopefully this goes smoothly with all the screen sharing. But it looks like it went good. Oh, but now we see that.
I should be able to.
They can't see that?
I don't think so.
Okay. Hopefully. Yeah, so this is their way to minimize it. Did that do it? Perfect. Okay. I'm not super familiar with GoToMeeting, but I think that worked out. This is the main website at mass.gov/biomap, and there's a lot to explore here. I'll kind of just touch on a few things. We have a data downloads and resources page, so for people looking to download that data and use it on a desktop platform like ArcGIS, this link will take you to MassGIS where you can download that data. And then in terms of a lot of the pages here, which are accessible from that home page and on this top bar, education has been kind of a new frontier for BioMap. We're really interested as much with municipalities, but also engaging with, education, whether that's like a non-traditional or a traditional setting. It's something we've been interested in. So we really point to these resources as great for that. And even if you're, there's somebody who you want to catch them up on BioMap, this is a great place to point them to. We have these story maps, which are fantastic not little, but rather quite complicated web pages that have pictures. They're dynamic. They link to a lot of things in the website. You can really spend a good amount of time clicking on all the links and seeing where they lead you. So I won't spend too long just because I want us to get to the map. But these fact sheets are a great reference to have. Describes all of the different components that we talked about in the presentation, as well as for the local and regional. It's all covered there. And with the Habitat Restoration, I can't see my tab super well. Habitat Restoration Resource Center, another great place where you could really just follow these threads through a lot of different places. This button down here is a great place to go for that technical support, funding options. BioMap being non-regulatory, it is involved in like incentives, grant planning, that sort of thing, and there's a lot of resources to look at there. But in terms of just one example of the resources here, this recommendations page sorts, all of these different natural community types into upland, wetland, and aquatic, and has accompanying fact sheets. So you can really scroll for a while, but just as an example of, what one of those fact sheets look like, I picked out vernal pools. it'll take you to this sort of page and you can get a habitat description, threats, management, recommendations, etc. So definitely encourage everyone to explore the site. Just being mindful of the time, I'm going to switch over to the map itself. But yeah, we like showing that part too because it's important and it's a great reference to have. So this is the map. You kind of have this default view. A great feature that we like to showcase, well, I guess mention, because of our servers, sometimes it doesn't work all the time, but we have this My Location feature where if you're on not a mass.gov server, it will track you to where you are. So if you're doing a site visit, you're in the field, I guess maybe because this isn't one of ours, we can give it a shot.
She means on
a computer. Yeah, it also works on a phone. It's, yeah, I'm kind of explaining the problem before explaining the thing, but we just do this real quick. Let's see if it finds us. Yeah, it worked. Great. So you can see how it takes you to that location where we are. But you can also, click stop and go back to not being tracked. So that's a great feature to have. And you can also, it has those standard features like changing the base map. So we have, ortho imagery if you want to get a better sense of land use. It's not loading perfectly because of all of the things happening, but let's see, maybe this one will be a little quicker. There we go. So that's a great feature to have. We like to point out. I'll go to topographic just for now. And then in the center panel here is where you can really play with the data. I'll take us in the address bar just to where we are at the moment. It'll zoom in. And then in this box here, you can really check and uncheck anything of interest. So if you want to look at the elements in their components form, the legend will adjust automatically. I've checked them here. We're not seeing them just because they're layered below the elements. But if I uncheck that, you have this view that is really great, breaks it all down. The great part about it being interactive is if you click on a certain polygon, might take a second, but you get a pop-up window that describes whatever is in the area that you click. So I clicked in an area where there's two different things happening. It looks like we have a forest core, and then I can just tab through and see there's also a landscape block there. It's a great feature to have. And then of course, the local and regional editions, which in this area really add to the picture. I'll actually zoom out a little bit just to see how much the regional data. You can see it's a great visual. Goes up into New Hampshire and Vermont, really emphasizing that large scale connectivity. So there can be really a lot going on when you have all the different data layers on. You can also open the menu. So say you only want to look at aquatics, you can uncheck everything else and it will adapt to whichever features you're particularly interested in. Is there any place specifically somebody wants to go to while we have it open here? Anyone want to shout out town or anything? It's okay. We can just keep it with Leominster.
I'm curious why the land around here fits in on that.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, BioMap. I
Yeah.
think I have local on right now. Yeah, I've got everything on. The modeling that went into BioMap takes into different development levels, and it's hard to say exactly like why one specific area was or was not included. It really comes down to the modeling, the different thresholds. It can be even a small difference below a threshold can change what's incorporated into the map.
And it is a enclosed area.
Yes.
Surrounded by roads.
Yeah, roads can be a bit of it can break up some of the polygons and such. That was definitely taken into account. I can highlight some of the other layers that aren't BioMap but are included, that are maintained by MassGIS. So we have that permanently protected open space. That's a great overlay to have, really can show progress of conservation versus the BioMap areas. And those are interactive as well. If you click on those, tells you, the details. And then, of course, the assessor's parcels layer, which is one of those scale-dependent layers. So I have it on, but we're not seeing it just because you have to zoom in a little bit more. But deselect those. Yeah, so it's a great feature, and I'll actually show in the summary report tool. This allows you to create reports, as Alec was saying during the presentation, for an area of interest. That can be a town where you can, type the name of the town and click report. And sometimes it takes a moment or two, but you get a report. When this page hopefully loads. Essentially, it can be saved as a PDF or printed out. It gives you an image of the town at whatever scale and whatever layers you have selected. So I made this before the presentation when I just had the statewide and the local selected. I added this to the title so you can edit it. And you have, your standard legend, scale bar, and it gives you the, a summary of essentially everything that's within that area of interest, and breaks it down. But you can also do within a certain area. It doesn't have to be just a town. If you go to the draw, I'm going to zoom in again, click start over. So we can see those assessors parcels, because there's the ability to freehand draw, which anyone can do for any specific area. But we have this great feature where you can, this one on the right, essentially draw a rectangle and select parcel, so you don't have to painstakingly draw, each border, especially with a weirdly shaped parcel, and run a report for just that area of interest as well. So, and it'll adjust, where it'll just give you whatever's selected there, and the data, of course, will change. So we have about 5 minutes left. I don't want to take up any time. People might have questions about using the map, or just general questions. We really appreciate, your time and interest, and it's been really great to come out here and talk to you all and everybody on GoToMeeting. I'll look at the owl. Oh yeah, the chat. Any chat comments?
So I don't see any comments in the
All
chat.
right.
But it's a great presentation. If there were any other questions here, or if anybody wants to zoom into another town or another location really quick, let us know. Otherwise, thank you all for coming. Thank you for being here. Thank you guys for a great presentation. I'd like to compliment you and the whole team and the agency on such a great product. In particular, the form and function of the website is amazing. I'm a visual person, and I like to explore and dig deep. And the website makes it easy. You go from one place to the next. You go in and out of the different sections, and it's just awesome. You can really explore. There's a lot of good resources and tools and information. Yeah, I spent some time, and I'll go back to it as a resource. It's really useful and great. So congratulations on that, and good job, nice work. Set along across and up. Let people know the planners up here appreciate it. So,
Glad to hear.
thank
Yeah,
you.
thanks so much for having us. It's been great.
And yeah, another thing, really, I can't thank you enough. Thank you for coming to us and bringing the show to us, to our region, to the regional planners. We really hit a good audience. We were able to get this out to a lot of our different towns, and it was really perfect for one of our lunch and learn seminars. So,
Yeah, happy to do it.
yeah. I'll be around for 4 minutes. I don't know what that means.
Yeah, for it. It's our email.
Yeah.